Woody dropped to his knees at first and then fell forward onto his face, motionless. Evan gave him a little push and the boy flopped onto his side. Chapter 27. Herbaceous Bereavement. Walking round the fields, being careful not to damage any of the crops or vegetables, Fate stopped every now and then to peer down at various clusters of herbs, reading the name tags that had been pushed into the earth near each different strain. Woody would also bend down to read the name tags, though always in vain, as the labels were in Latin. He tried crouching down on one knee, as though that would make things easier. It did not help him, so he moved up close to Fate and began inquiring as to the meaning of the strange words. "What does this say?" he asked about a herb which was covered in small violet flowering buds. "Thymus serpulum," Fate told him, trying to speak clearly. "Does it have a simple name?" "Wild thyme," replied Fate. "And this one?" the boy inquired, about some tall, thin plants with little blue flowers perched on the very top. "Linum satissimum," replied Fate, rather pleased with the boy's inquisitiveness. "Pardon?" "Flax." Woody was feeling confident, and as Fate moved along to some different herbs, he squeezed past it and tried to read the name on the tag. Vaccinium motionless, said Fate, helping the youngster along. "Blueberry. It means blueberry," said Evan, as its meaning just jumped to his head out of nowhere. "Sage. That one's sage," he announced, while feeling somewhat perplexed at his now knowledge regarding such matters. He began thinking about his sudden understanding of herbs and their Latin names, which he had just acquired, and he wondered if his young self had become interested in herbs and other such horticulture because of their visit to the fields of personificadia. And he realised, of course, that the boy's acquired knowledge was always transferred to his own mind. "How did he know that?" inquired his young self, rather impressed and pleased at how clever he would become as a grown-up. "There, over there," Fate interrupted excitedly, as he spotted the ones he had been looking for. "Those are what we need to make the herbal preparations," he informed them, pointing to some herbs that were grown beneath the shade of the wall. Evan and Woody had never seen Fate excited before, and they had a job keeping up with him as he dashed towards the plants. He checked the name tag and the base of the herbs just to be certain that they were indeed the herbs which they appeared to be, and then he started tugging at the thick stems. "The parts we need," he said, as he continued pulling at the defined herbs, "are the radix and the bulbous." "The what and the which?" questioned Evan, feeling somewhat bemused that despite his newly acquired knowledge of Latin, he found himself still lost in the unfamiliar language. "Sorry," puffed Fate, still tugging at the plant. "The root and the bulb." "All right, of course, the root and the bulb." As Fate continued tugging and Evan watched the plant resisting, he thought how steadfast and firm it must be rooted into the ground, for he could personally vouch for the strength which Fate possessed in his hands. "It's no use," conceded Fate. "I'll have to dig it up. See if you can find a trowel or something," he asked of them both. And so they set about trying to locate the sought-after implement. A moment later, Evan called out, "This should do the trick," as he waved a small garden fork in the air. He took it over to Fate, who used it to loosen the soil around the shrub. Woody was beginning to get bored, so began wandering around looking at some of the other plants, trying to read the tags which they had been labelled with. Part of the dry stone walling had fallen down, and some of the wall toppers had crushed some small orange flowering herbs. Poor thing, he sympathetically remarked, half to himself and half to the plant. Where the fallen stones had made a gap in the wall, Woody made his way through into the next field. All that it appeared to contain was long grass. The boy was about to turn around and go back into the field where Fate was making steady progress, when he noticed at the base of the wall some flowering plants. The tall plants had long, green, ribbed leaves, and dozens of small, white-petalled flowers growing in clusters at the top of each stem. Woody peeled the leaves off one of the plants, thinking it looked much nicer without. I'll pick some of these flowers and let the oldest time separation of me give them to those two ladies. After scalping 4 of the plants, he had to clear the discarded leaves away from their base before he could get to their stems to pick them. He noticed that these plants also had a name tag, only instead of the tag being pushed into the soil, it was fastened around the main stalks of what he now knew to be herbs. Veratrum, he tried once more, this time determined to pronounce its name. Veratrum album. He repeated its name 4 times as he picked the flowering herbs that in Woody's mind now resembled a bunch of flowers. He made his way back to the others. I've picked these, he said to Evan. You could give them to Luss or Love, or both of them. But before Evan had a chance to take them, the youngster sneezed, almost dropping the plants. Bless you, Evan was about to say, but before he managed to speak again, the boy sneezed again. Oh dear, Evan said, and his young self sneezed once more. Fate, who was wrapping some herbs in a large linen cloth, also said, bless you, and Woody sneezed again. Fate thought that the youngster must suffer from hay fever, but then, as he tied the linen cloth around the herbs, he realised that if that was the case, then Evan ought to be sneezing as well. Probably grown out of it, he thought. I don't feel very well, wheezed the youngster. Fate turned around to look at him, and when he saw the boy holding the deadly herbs which he had innocently picked, he yelled at him to drop the plants. Now! Drop them! As the plants fell to the ground, Woody felt scared, and he knew something dreadful was happening to him. His hands clutched at his stomach, and he began to retch. He knew he was in awful trouble, and for a brief moment visions of his mother crying over the loss of her second child flashed through his mind. Woody dropped to his knees at first, and then fell forward onto his face, motionless. Evan gave him a little push, and the boy flopped onto his side. He lay there, as still as a corpse, while Evan stood in stunned silence. He stared down at the boy, unable to speak and barely capable of thinking. The linen cloth that Fate had been holding fell from his hands, and he dropped to his knees so he could confirm by a closer examination the nightmare nature of the plants. No! He buried his face in his hands. There's some album, white hellebore, white bloody hellebore, and he cursed the plants some more. Don't touch those, he warned Evan. Evan was sickened with grief for his tragic young self lying at his feet. Then he was stricken with guilt for not looking after the boy, as was his duty and his main reason for coming on their journey. Curiosity and fear entered the field when they heard the commotion, but curiosity left again as soon as he saw the seriousness of the situation, whereas fear grabbed Evan around his throat and pointed at the boy, informing Evan that his young self could die. Evan knew that the extinction of the child's life would wipe out his own existence. Fear hung around, not helping matters. Evan was paralysed by fear's words, unable to move. Not so the boy, for he began to violently shake and then convulse until a full-blown fit had taken over his body. "Do something, Fate! Please, do something!" Fate's eyes darted around the field, scanning the herbs that were scattered around. "What are you looking for?" asked Evan, helplessly confused. "Where did you get these from? Where?" A feeling of dread made it difficult for Evan's mind to function properly, and not being able to understand why Fate needed to know where the plants came from merely hindered his attempts to focus clearly. He tried to think where would he have been when he had picked them, but the only thought that came to his mind was, what if he dies? A terrible realization gripped him as he felt himself crumbling uncontrollably into paradoxical oblivion, and he thought, this is it, this is how it ends. An awareness of his strength draining from his core made him drop to his knees. I'm dying." Without drawing back his hand, Fate gave Evan a sharp slap across his face. "Where did the boy pick the plants from?" From the next field, where the wall's fallen down," blurted Evan's reply, jarred loose by Fate's attack on his subconscious awareness. "Quick!" cried Fate, grabbing Evan by the wrist. "The antidote! It always grows nearby." They both stood up and ran over to the tumbled-down wall, but all they could see was the white hellebore and the leaves that Woody had pulled off. "There must be some growing nearby, somewhere. There must be," insisted Fate, trying to concentrate on locating the antidote rather than the consequences which would befall them all if the herbal remedy was not close at hand. "What are we looking for?" asked Evan, trying to concentrate on the task at hand, while feeling weaker by the minute. "Green, bushy plant, little orange flowers." "This?" asked Evan, pointing to the plant that was being crushed by the fallen wall. "Yes!" cried Fate, "yes!" And he flung the wall choppers out of the way as though they were pebbles in order to excavate the antidote. He yanked the herb from the ground, bulb, roots and all, and then he hurried back to the child. Fate started groping at Woody's jeans, while Evan stared in disbelief at Fate's odd behaviour. "Where is it? Where's the penknife?" asked Fate, frantically patting at the boy's pockets. "It's in the hotel on the bedroom floor." "We need something to pierce the bulb with," said Fate, appealing to Evan for assistance. "These?" he responded, holding out his house keys. Fate snatched the keys and pushed one of them into the largest of the herbaceous bulbs. Drops of milky latex oozed from the incision made in its wall. On Fate's instructions, Evan held the boy's head steady and his mouth open. Fate squeezed the bulb, sending droplets of milk into the youngster's mouth. The drugs contained in the milky latex had a marked and immediate effect upon the boy. Papaverine stopped his convulsions, much to Evan's great relief. Narcotine and other constituents suppressed and then eradicated the toxins and poisons in his system. The natural morphine contained in the antidote eased the boy's brain and stomach cramps. Slowly, Woody came round and began to mumble something about being sorry, Ma. On opening his eyes, he was totally disorientated, and although Fate gave him an explanation as to what had occurred, Woody did not properly understand what had gone on, nor could he appreciate the fact that although death had not taken him, he had paid him a visit and considered leaving him 2 coins for the ferryman. When they felt that he had recovered adequately enough to stand up, Fate and Evan helped the unsteady youngster to his feet, and they tentatively made their way back to the hotel. Fear tagged on behind until he thought that he was no longer needed in their company. As they walked, Evan reflected on how near to his own demise he had been, and although it was not a part of Fate's plan, it was a lesson that Evan would never forget. Briefly, the absurd notion that perhaps the whole incident had been planned by Fate entered into his thoughts. Maybe Fate had orchestrated the incident as a means to make Evan appreciate life to its full extent. Evan dismissed the idea as being far too twisted and dangerous to warrant any serious consideration. Besides, when he looked at Fate, he could see how troubled he looked and how deep in thought he was. Fate was considering the severe consequences that the boy's death would have had on himself and of course Evan. And, for the first time on their journey, he began to question his right to interfere and change the course which Evan's life was supposed to take. Even Fate had to sometimes justify himself to a power greater than the authority which he possessed. He felt as though he may be walking very close to a line that was not meant to be crossed. Accountability began to cover Fate's conscience like a cloud of uneasiness, and a cold chill which had no right to be out on such a warm sunny day ran all the way down his spine.